Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Pints with Ayre. I'm Brent Heffley, Sales and Marketing Director. I'm here with Ariel Brown, our VP and Senior Engineer, and Ryan Berry, our CEO and Expert Technician. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
All right. Today, we're going to talk about digital filters. But before we get to that, let's talk about some beer because that's always a good way to start off the video.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What did you bring today, Ariel?
So I had been craving the last few weeks for beer. I haven't had in quite a while, but I was looking for some Duvel. So the only one they had locally is this new one.
Oh, man.
This Duvel single fermented Belgian golden.
That's cool. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I haven't seen this one before. I was looking for the good old small bottles, but this is what they had. But it is delicious and crisp, a little bit sweet, a little bit hoppy actually, and it's delicious.
Right. Nice. I guess that's
we'll be feeling good.
Yeah.
Totally. I
There's a 16 ounce. Yep.
Right. The full Imperial pint, get a 20 ouncer.
There you go.
Yeah, but it's Belgium, so they don't do Imperial pints.
That's right.
Yeah, I guess that's the problem with doing every other week schedule instead of every week. You know, the search for new beers is a little more spread out, but I managed to.
We're getting good suggestions for beers too, so it's starting to come in. So those are well appreciated.
Nice. I went out and picked up one of my camping standards. For anyone who's ever spent time in the outdoors, the vicious mosquito will either ring a bell or bring a little PTSD back from
That's right.
camping trips where you just couldn't get away from them. But that's Sun River Brewing over in Central Oregon. Beautiful place, beautiful area. So cool. All right. Well, hopefully everyone out there has a good pint and is ready for a good episode, because digital filters is something that, we've talked a lot about before. We've, included it in literature and marketing on our website. But going deeper into it is something that's really interesting because, as opposed to a lot of audio, it's just been around for us since the early 80s, late 70s, right? Since when CD was introduced.
Yeah,
we were introduced to digital filtering. So you want to start off and just talk about what it is in general, like a high level overview, Ariel?
Yeah. So, a digital filter, a lot of them try to mimic somewhat an analog filter, which is typically going to be often in the analog domain is often done with resistor capacitor, maybe inductors. But so in the digital domain, there are some advantages there because it's programmable, it is configurable, it doesn't require the space and cost of quality of capacitors. And so, especially in today's age, there's huge advantages to doing that in the digital domain. So there are different types of digital filters, but the main one we use is called a FIR, F-I-R, finite impulse response filter. And so the way it works is that there you have a set of coefficients, and each one is called a tap. And so and the size number of coefficients of a filter can vary widely from tens. I think we've had some filter we usually are only 13 or 17 taps up to thousands of taps. And so what happens is that you store up and you have access to the sequential audio samples. And so you then multiply, you then line them up next to the set of coefficients. And so each sample is lined up with a different coefficient, and you multiply them, and then you add the result together. And so it's called a multiply and accumulate. And so then for each time sample, you then shift your audio samples one, do that multiply and accumulate again, and do that sequentially, continuously. And so then that multiply accumulate gives you then the filtered resulting output for each sample input. just high level overview of how a FIR digital filter works.
Okay. So in terms of digital filters, so you've got, let's take either a streaming service or a CD player. You've got digital data that's coming in, either off of a CD or, over your Ethernet cable. It enters the player, and where's the filter set? Does it go to the DAC chip first and then to the filter? Do you filter it before it goes to the DAC? How do all those pieces fit together within a player?
Yeah, and so as far as a digital audio product, the reason we use a filter is a digital filter is typically because when you're converting from the digital sample domain to the continuous analog domain, there are some interesting phenomena that happen when you are trying to bridge that domain. And so you get what is called these aliases, or these images around the conversion frequency. And so early on, before we even had digital filters, you can just send the raw data to the DAC. So let's say that's at 44.1 kilohertz. If you send the data to that, if you, what happens is that you have these image frequencies that are mirrored at multiples of half of the sampling rate. So at 22.05 kilohertz, you will get these versions, these image frequencies of the input data, which is unwanted information. Now it's higher frequency, and so alone it might not be audible, but we know that it does affect the sound. And then if you have that ultrasonic information going to downstream components, that can actually, some components cannot handle high levels of ultrasonic frequencies, and it's going to damage them or make them behave poorly. If you don't upsample or oversample, so you are trying to convert at 44.1 kilohertz, to avoid that, you would have to have fairly complex analog filter to filter out those ultrasonic frequencies. But you only have a very narrow band to be able to do that, because ideally you want to keep frequencies up to about 20 kilohertz, but you want to block everything above 22.05 kilohertz. That's very difficult to do in the analog domain. And so that's where, even in the very early days of CD players, where the idea of upsampling and digital filters comes in. What happens is when you upsample and you are now pushing your conversion rate, for us, we go all the way up to 16x. So we are converting at, say, 706 kilohertz. So now those image frequencies are pushed much further up, and now it's very easy to use a very simple and high quality analog filter, basically a capacitor or a couple capacitors, to filter out those high frequency filters, the high frequency aliases.
Right. So you push them way up, so they're way away from the audible domain.
Right. But so the process that you use to upsample to get that conversion frequency up is you are kind of artificially interpolating data points between the original data points. Now you still want to keep the original data points, but you are with the interpolation filter, the way it works is that you have your original data points, and then if you're going up by a factor of 2, you would put a 0. You actually put zeros in between each real sample. If you're going by 4, you put 3 zeros in between each of the original samples, and then you put it through this low pass interpolating digital filter, and then that calculates these intermediate values between the original values, and then that lets that whole process in the digital to analog conversion in the DAC then allows those image frequencies to be pushed much further up. So the whole purpose of these digital anti-aliasing interpolation filters is to make it easy to do the final anti-aliasing filter in the analog domain really simple.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now you mentioned
A lot of data too.
you said upsampling and oversampling a couple times. Can you briefly describe the difference between those for?
Well, one can be the other and the other not, and so there's not 100% agreement on what is what. So at Ayre, we I would consider upsampling, I believe is the term we use, where it is just an integer rate increase. So if it's a 40.1 kilohertz sampled digital data, we're just going up by factor 2 or 4 or 8 or 16. And oversampling can be that, but a lot of people use that also to refer to converting to a non-related sample rate. So if you're going from 44.1 to 96, and 44.1 is not a factor 2, it is a non-integer factor. And so in that case, you have to basically throw away all the original data and calculate all new data. And that's something that we strictly avoid. That's something we do not believe is a way to do it. We have listened to various forms of trying to do that well, and it's not hard to do it right. So we do it right, and it just sounds better.
All right. Great. So there are a lot of different, obviously a lot of different DAC products out there. I think a lot of people may use the digital chip itself for the filtering. Some people do it externally. We do it externally. Do you want to talk a little bit about the differences there, doing that outside the chip or inside the chip?
Yeah, and so even backing up a little further, so even so it's like in our original product in the D1, and in the early days, most of the DAC chips were far simpler devices. So there was like a ladder DAC, and it was just a DAC. And so to do a digital filter, we actually had to have a separate chip. So we would send the data to a digital filter chip, usually by Burr Brown, and then we'd send that data to the DAC, add at a higher sample rate. Now, nowadays, almost any modern DAC chip has the digital filter, and often many optional digital filters built into the DAC chip. That's just the nature of modernization and miniaturization and all these features being built into smaller parts.
Sure.
And as well as silicon getting cheaper and the density of transistors getting cheaper, they can build more and more and more into a smaller chip, which is great. Now, but that gives you just a couple of the digital filters, essentially those low pass interpolation filters that the DAC manufacturer has designed and have given you. So there's only a couple options, and so and some of those are acceptable for certain products. We've certainly gone further, and we did many months of both research and listening and experimentation of our own digital filters. So we use an FPGA, which is a field programmable gate array that we can reprogram on the fly, and so we come up with a set of coefficients that define the digital filter. So we do that externally in FPGA, and then send. We also upsample the 16x of the base rate of either 44, 1, or 48. So we're always upsampling to 706 or to 768.
And that is we do as a single pass on that.
That's a good point, because what again, going back to the early days of digital audio, and when silicon was larger and expensive to use, it was it was far more efficient and hence cheaper and easier to do just a 2x filter, but then they would cascade 2x filters. So if you wanted to get to 8x, they would have 3 2x filters. So that each is far simpler, but you get to the end result. But when you do that, you are then compounding any kind of noise and errors you get compounded along the way.
Right.
And there's some other, and there's some other phenomena that is different detrimental. So yeah, we always do just a single pass. We go from 1x to 16x, or it might be 2x or 4x, but we go up to 16x in one digital filter in one pass. And we do, and so all of our coefficients are 32-bit in depth. We can accept 16, 20, 24-bit input data. We've got a very deep multipliers, and then we output 32-bit data.
And I think that's one of the key things to our approach to this, because when we do things through the FPGA, it really gives us full control on how it's being done, which makes sure that we know that the process is done correctly. And that's one of the big things for us here at Ayre. There's questions on do I do my upsampling on the software side? Do I do it whichever way? And for us, we like to do it here in the DAC because we know we're doing it correctly, and that gives us full control there. And again, just because we have that FPGA / DAC kind of hybrid approach, we know that the process is correct as opposed to the easy way to do it, so to speak.
Right. Right. Because there are, it is one of those things, once you get into the digital realm, there are lots of different options, lots of different places you can do those things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, I don't have any doubt that there's plenty of software out there that does things, a good way, for example, but not all software is created equal. So, and
Right.
not all, and it's never static. So, things may change over the years, and we've seen that happen in the past. So, it allows us to have that kind of control and have the ability to make sure that, that conversion process is done correctly, because it is a very, very critical, if not the most critical part of the whole chain, is getting digital, which we can't listen to, into something that's actually audible and something we can enjoy.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and then it's getting into more specific about our implementation. And for the parts that we probably marketed and talked about the most is that we use, we've talked a lot about steep roll off versus slow roll off filters, and the effects that has on the resulting data and resulting sound. And so, traditionally most filters were, steep roll off, or sometimes what's called a brick wall. And so what it means is that their transition from the pass band to the stop band, that kind of transition to where it's not filtering anything to the frequency where you want to filter everything happens in a very narrow frequency range. And the compromise there is that it can generate quite a bit of, it can generate some ringing artifacts for, depending on the input signal, some ringing at the conversion frequency, which there's some debate on whether that actually happens to an actual audio signal. But then there's that huge discontinuity can also create some interesting kind of phase shifts at that sudden transition. And so we prefer a very much slower roll-off filter, which again we can do when we do that upsampling, so that we have essentially between 20 kilohertz and basically 350-ish kilohertz to be able to make that transition slowly.
Right.
So, and then the other big difference in modern filters is linear phase versus minimum phase. And so the main feature you'll see is that a linear phase filter. So when you look at, the way you visualize a filter, and actually it's an exact representation of the coefficients of the filter, is basically the impulse response. And so we see an impulse response of a linear phase. It is perfectly symmetrical. and it starts at one side and it starts to ring, and then there's a peak, and then there's a decay. So there's a rise and decay, and it's perfectly symmetrical. And so there's a phenomena of it reacting to any particular musical event slightly before it actually happens. And so, and again, there's theoretically and mathematically, if you look at it, any of that ringing might not happen in reality, but it's still unnecessary and most likely to adversely affect the sound. So a minimum phase, it oversimplifying it, it shifts that halfway over so that it starts with the peak and then there's just the decay.
Like
So
an
that
echo,
there's no
echo after the sound event as opposed to before the sound event.
right, which is so if you look at anything in nature, that is what you would see naturally. If there's any kind of if you hit something, you slap something, you clap, it doesn't build up to it.
Right.
There's a first event, and then there's that kind of decay.
So and I'm a big believer that the brain tries to associate things into something that we understand. So when it does hear things like a pre-event like that, it's going to try to mentally ignore it and push that into the after the event and everything, just kind of mimic what we've evolved with. And so when you have an unnatural event like that, I think your brain works a lot harder to try to rectify that sound, so to speak. And that's where you get a lot of that listener fatigue. And when you're trying to listen to something, and when you have something that's more natural, more mimics what we hear in nature, that process gets to relax in our minds. And so you can listen for longer periods of time. You don't feel that fatigue. You don't feel exhausted after listening to music for a couple hours or whatnot. And so that's
Right.
that's really big to the enjoyment process of music.
Yeah, and that is a big part of it. That's part of our listening test, right? As we went through this whole
Absolutely.
process and listened to all these different algorithms that you and Charlie worked on, and all the different the filtering options.
Yeah, I mean, what it's funny because we listen to various DACs, and we've done as much as just kind of plug them in and just see what they do, and versus having our FPGA drive them. And we've never found a situation where we're just happy with what they did, and it takes a lot of tweaking and tailoring, and turning this off or turning that on, or whatever we do to the process that makes the DAC really shine for us. And
You're
it's
talking
not
about
just
the DAC chip itself.
the DAC chip itself. Yeah, exactly. And so it's not just a matter of slapping the chip on the board and then sending data and power to it. It actually really does take a lot of work by Ariel and by Charlie and Ariel beforehand to get these things to really shine and sound their best, essentially.
Yeah, and there's I know Charlie, I forget if we published a white paper or not, but I know he self-published quite a bit on many forums and talked extensively about a lot of our digital filter technology. So if anyone's interested to go a bit deeper, it's out there. You can certainly dig it up.
Yeah, we actually have it on the website, so
Okay.
you can find that. I'll put up a link here for you guys out there if you want to go read in depth on it.
That really gets into the nuts and bolts even more so than the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it gets fairly complicated technical because it's a really interesting, the whole sampling theory. The first step going from analog to digital. There are some strict constraints that need to be adhered to make it work properly without some really bad side effects. And then it's almost the mirror of that going from digital back to analog. And so, and there's this, and it can be those are pretty easy because when you are, discrete sampling like the actual analog signal is this continuously varying entity. And so when you are just sampling at certain points, and so when you then just have those points and you store it digitally, and years later, whatever it is, so now you have if you're just looking at the subset of that, so you have these 2 points, you have these 2 values, and you don't know what happens between those 2 values. And there are many possible frequencies that could have represented. It could have been straight from there to there. It could have just been a single cycle from there to there. It could have been many cycles from there to there, which is why, which is more or less, how that correlates to the DAC generating these image frequencies, because those are essentially the possible frequencies that could have that could be represented by those 2 digital samples, right?
Right.
And so, but most of those are, all those upper frequency ones are actually the incorrect ones. And so that's, we're trying to keep those out of, we're trying to keep those from distorting the signals we want, and keep them from also disturbing downstream analog circuitry that might not be able to handle them.
Right.
So that's pretty much what it comes down to.
Yeah, great. All right, so that's our filter.
So one question actually that I have for you. So, a lot of people ask me, what's better about the slow roll off versus a brick wall filter? Well, I mean, I know obviously we have the preference of having the slow roll off filter that we use, and that's kind of represented by our listen switch on the products that have a listen measure switch option. But why is one better than the other?
Well, and again, it's hard to be definitive there. One is again that there's not that sudden discontinuity in the in the behavior of the filter. There's anything that more gentleness, and so again, and then the way we prefer to visualize it is that when it's a steep roll off, it produces many more cycles of ringing, and when you have a slow roll off filter, that equates to a very small amount of ringing. And so the filters we use that are slow roll off, you only have like 1.5 to 2 cycles of actual ringing. So it actually damps out very quickly.
Okay.
So that's where we kind of visualize it to ourselves.
Yeah, and that's kind of a fun thing too. If anyone at home has one of our products that has the listen and measure switch on the back, you can experience it yourself. You can listen to a track or an album and switch it over to because they all ship in listen mode, where measure mode is more of a hard wall filter because it does show up on measurements better. So you have your option, but you can listen to it both ways and see the difference. It's pretty obvious.
Yep. Yeah, and there are certainly people I'd say a small percentage, but there's some people that actually prefer the measured position. And that's again, this is a completely subject field that we live in here, and as well as both individual subjectivity as well as the rest of the system. The amplifiers, the speakers, the cables, they all are all going to combine. Each of those pieces it is its own filter. So there can be some system matching there. Overall, we truly believe in that listen filter, and that slow roll off minimum phase habitizing filter.
Yep. Well, it was a good year's worth of work to do that. That was a big project.
Yeah.
But well worth the deep dive into it, because it's it has made all of those products since such a huge success.
And I see more and more products out there kind of trying to mimic that filter. So it's definitely something that was a good find by us.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, if you have questions about digital filters, other topics you want to see us cover, email us at pints@ayre.com. Until next time, cheers, stay healthy and safe, and happy listening.